The price of MrBeast's stock is... I spent the last few hours trying to figure out what one share of MrBeast would cost. That sounded weird. Moving on. I tried to see if Google had the answer, but it was completely useless. Unable to find anything even remotely related to a MrBeast stock, I took matters into my own hands. Accepting the obvious side quest life has given me, it was time to find out for myself what one share of MrBeast would cost. In order to find out what the price of his stock would cost, I would first need to find out his free cash flow, or FCF for short. Free cash flow is the operating cash flow minus payments for the acquisition of property and/or business expenditure. Dude! English. In other words, it's the money left over after all expenses are paid. Normally, this would be extremely easy to find for public companies like Apple because they release what's called the 10-K. However, because MrBeast is not a public company, things just got a million times harder. I would first need to find out how much money he's actually bringing in. And for simplicity purposes, I based my numbers based off the ad revenue from his main channel alone. Over the last 3 years, these were the insane numbers that MrBeast was able to pull in. And assuming that he makes an average of around 450 RPM or per thousand views, these are the figures calculated into cash. Now that we know his revenue from AdSense, now we need to figure out how much he's spending in order to make these numbers. Luckily, Google did come in handy for this, and I was able to find this clip from the Iced Coffee Hour.
The main channel now, probably you're spending like 3 or 4 million a month.
And since that video came out in 2022, we can make a rough estimate of what his costs per month were in the other 2 years as well. It's alright if these figures are not insanely accurate, as the data will be calculated on a much broader scale. The next thing we need to do is find out how much these numbers will grow over a period of 10 years. However, there's an issue. Because MrBeast doesn't have a 10-K, it's basically impossible to calculate accurate data. And because it's nearly impossible to calculate the FCF without accurate data, I'll be taking the average growth in views calculated into revenue from AdSense as a replacement for FCF growth. Here we can see from 2021 to 2022, there was a growth of 62.69%. And from 2022 to 2023, there was a growth of 65.81%. So that brings the question, how much will we grow from 2023 onwards? If we take these two numbers, we'll get an average of 64.25%. But knowing how the market works and how stocks can sometimes function, I'll be taking a much more conservative approach to that number. Let's take the following hypothetical values and say that from 2024 to 2027, he'll grow 45% per year. And from 2027 to 2030, he'll grow an average of 25% per year. And from 2032 to 2033, he'll grow 10%. And onwards after that, 2.5% per year. This brings us to an average of 23.5% per year for 10 years. These numbers calculated into revenue and FCF are as shown. While it's awesome that we found this out, we ran into yet another roadblock. In order to find the potential value of the MrBeast stock, we would need to find what's called the terminal value. But in order to find the terminal value, we need to find out the share price, which is what we're trying to figure out in the first place. The terminal value is the projected value of the business beyond the forecasted cash flows. So I went back and did a quick Google search. From that, I was able to find Andrew Schultz's podcast where he had MrBeast as a guest. MrBeast claimed in this podcast that in 10 years, someone will need to offer him $10 to $20 billion for his entire business. Using what MrBeast himself values his company in 10 years, we'll be taking yet another conservative approach and say that by 2033, his main channel alone will be worth $7 billion. We'll be using this number as the terminal value. Now that we know what MrBeast values his company in 10 years, we need to find out what it's worth today and what his potential stock price would be. For that, I'll be using the discounted cash flow formula with a discounted rate of 12.5% because obviously MrBeast needs to beat the market. And with those numbers plugged in, here are the values. And when adding a theoretical value of $25 million worth of easily liquidatable assets, along with a 20% margin of safety, our new intrinsic value of the MrBeast stock would be $2,145,133,600. Because there is no public float or price yet of MrBeast stock, we'll be using the value mentioned before as the market capitalization and his subscribers as the public float. This gives us 229 million shares as the public float and that number as the market capitalization. And now using those two numbers, the price of MrBeast stock is $9.36. Now, that was a little underwhelming, so for Gits and Shiggles, I changed the float to 420,690. And with that, the new price of MrBeast stock is $5,099.08. Subscribe.